Hey, what's up, everybody? We are live. I'm so glad to be talking to you today. My name's Brent, in case you do not know who I am. I'm the jazz musician behind LearnJazzStandards.com. LearnJazzStandards.com, it's a jazz resource, a free jazz resource for everybody, spreading jazz education and just lots of stuff there. We have podcasts every single week. We have blog posts, videos, all sorts of things just to help you become a better jazz musician, and that's what we're all about. I'm a jazz musician, I'm a blogger, I'm a podcaster, I'm an author, I write books, music books, and so that's who I am, just in case we haven't been acquainted yet before. But I'm going live today before my gig. I have a gig coming up, so I can't be too ridiculously long today. I got to get prepared for my gig. It's a quartet gig. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited for it. And so today I want to talk to you about our podcast episode that we came out this week on the LJS podcast, episode 61, which is all about scales. It's about how to use scales in your jazz solos the right way. So I wanted to just give you a little snippet of that today, talk a little bit about that. You can find that whole episode at learnjazzstandards.com/episode 61. So I really hope you go check it out there. And since we are on YouTube right now, it is also up on YouTube as well if you want to just check out the channel there. Or you can subscribe on iTunes so that you never miss an episode. But I thought I'd just give you a little piece of what I talk about in that episode today before you go out and check the rest of it, hopefully. And so I want to talk about the things that scales are good for and the things that scales are bad for in jazz. I mean, we know that scales are good to work on as musicians, as instrumentalists, right? But there are things in a jazz context where they can be used in the wrong way. You know, a question I get a lot from students of mine, from emails, from those that use the website. They ask me, hey, what scale do I play over such and such chord? Like, what scale do I play over a dominant seventh chord? You know, they want to know. I think what they're really asking me is what are the quote-unquote right notes that I can play? And I sort of grimace a little bit when I get that question, just because there's a risk of using them in the wrong way in a jazz context. And so I want to talk a little bit about that really quickly. Let's go over the pros and cons, the good and the bad. Let's start with the negative. Let's start with what are scales bad for in a jazz context. Okay, the first one I think they're bad for is learning jazz language. Okay, so scales, they're very calculated things, and when it comes to learning jazz language, we need to be listening to the greats. We need to be listening to jazz musicians that we admire and listening to their language, learning their solos, learning their lines, just simply listening to jazz to learn the language, right? I mean, and scales can't really help us do that. So that's a really important thing to understand is we need to be learning the language, and scales is probably not the best way to approach that. You may be able to play the right notes, but that doesn't mean that you're playing jazz language. So number one, scales, they're not good for learning jazz language. Okay, number two, they're not good for learning how to play melodically. So again, like I said, scales are calculated things. They're not really melodies in themselves, I would argue. They're just a series of notes separated about by different intervals, right? So they're not really great for creating melodies. In fact, the temptation can be is when you're trying to think about scales over certain chord progressions or chords, the temptation can be to play the scale rather than use the notes in the scale to create melodies. So sometimes it's a way of thinking about it that can make all the difference, which I'll talk about in a second. But they're not good for learning how to play melodically. Okay, now the third thing that I think scales are bad for in a jazz context is they're not good for improving your ear. They're not exercising your ear in any way. This is kind of the left brain side of music, where if I'm going to play a Mixolydian mode over top of a dominant seventh chord, well, I'm really just thinking about what is the Mixolydian mode and where are the notes? How do I play that over top of this chord? So there's no using my ear in order to create a melody. So scales, not so good for improving your ear. Okay, so that was the negative. Let's move on to the positive. What are scales good for when it comes to playing jazz? Okay, so the first thing, number one, is they're good for learning your instrument. Okay, learning your instrument I think we all know this about scales already, right? Everybody says to learn scales, and there's a good reason for it. It can help you learn your instrument, explore different tonalities, and help you get inside of what you need to know about music and music theory and all these things that are so important. When I learn scales, I always try to take them into 12 keys because that's super important for learning my instrument better, mapping out my instrument. So scales are great for learning your instrument. You should definitely be learning scales, and you have to know your instrument well to play jazz. Jazz it's not the easiest of music. It really requires a certain level of virtuosity. So you want to know your instrument well. But that leads into number 2, the second reason the second thing that scales are useful for, and that is technique, learning technique, being able to play what you're hearing in your head on your instrument, right? We don't want to be limited by our abilities. We want to break through all the barriers that we have, and scales is a great way to do that, adding patterns to them, of course, just playing arpeggios that come from the scales. All this stuff is super important to building up technique so that you can navigate your instrument freely. There's no fog on your instrument. So scales are great for technique. Again, important when it comes to being an improviser. Now, the third thing that scales are useful for, and this is really important because this is actually what I really talk about a lot in the podcast episode. I'm not going to go too far into it on this YouTube live here, but so I want you to listen to the podcast, of course. So when we think about scales as pitch collections, and I talk a lot about pitch collections, pitch collections in the podcast, and I talk about what that means and how to think about them at scales as pitch collections and how that can really change the way you approach scales in general. So scales, they're good for conceptualizing musical ideas. And when we think about them as pitch collections, it can kind of open up a lot of doors. You could start thinking about different harmonic and melodic contexts by using scales to help you find the pitch collections that you can use to make melodies. So here's a classic example. This is a little chord scale theory. And again, this is where it's useful. It can be useful to apply chord scale theory if done the right way. So let's just say we have a B flat major 7 sharp 11, or just a major 7 sharp 11. You can play a minor pentatonic a half step down from that over top of that chord. So if we do have a B flat major 7 sharp 11, you can play an A minor pentatonic a half step down from that, and that will outline all the important notes in that chord. That'll outline the sharp 11, and it'll outline the 7th, it'll outline the 3rd, it will outline the 9th, it'll outline the 13th, all these important notes in there that will make that sound come out. And I think that could be really helpful. It's like we all know the minor pentatonic scale, right? And if you don't, that's okay. But that's a really familiar scale, especially if you're a guitar player. I see all the guitar players writing this down anxiously. Oh my gosh, minor pentatonic scale. Sorry, guitar players. I'm a guitar player, so I can make fun of you. But it's just a different way to think about it, because you could also think about playing the Lydian mode over top of a major 7 sharp 11 chord, but thinking about it as a minor pentatonic scale, a half step down from the root, is just a different way to think about it, right? It's just a different approach altogether, and I think that's an amazing thing about chord scale theory and all that stuff. So the third thing scales are useful for is conceptualizing musical ideas. Okay, now I want you to check out the rest of the podcast episode. It's at learnjazzstandards.com/episode 61, and we come out with an episode every single week, so you could also subscribe on iTunes, and of course it is actually on YouTube now, so you can check out that episode there. Now I thought I saw some comments come up, so let me check these out. Sorry, I'm a little bit new to YouTube Live, so bear with me. I'm on my phone. Oh. All right, I'm not seeing it, guys. Oh, here we go. Hey, Ricardo, what's up? Nice to see you. Zach. Okay, Ricardo, you asked, what's the best way to achieve the ability to play what we hear in our minds? Wow, that's a crazy question. There's so much in there, and a lot of that I think And if anybody else in the group wants to put some input on that too, get some more minds involved. I think it's a lot of ear training. Is just some basics. There's fundamentals like interval training, being able to recognize what intervals are, like your major thirds and your major sixes, and also being able to hear chords and understanding what those are. So there's some fundamentals, and then the other side of it, Ricardo, I would say, is just being able to learn more language. The more you learn and the more you listen, it's almost like osmosis, sort of. The more you do that stuff and the more you play with other people, you start, there's this connection between your ear and your instrument that just develops. So it takes time. There's no simple, easy answer, but just work on all of that stuff. Starting to train my ears to listen and recognize intervals. You got it, Ricardo. See, you're on the right track for sure. I think that's awesome. I'm glad you're doing that. That's definitely what I would say. And feel free if anybody else has anything else to add to that, whether it's live right now or if it's on the rebroadcast later, the replay later. That would be great just to fill up our knowledge on how we can do that for Ricardo and anybody else who might have that. Okay, so if there are no other questions that maybe you think I could answer or not. Here's another one. Who's your favorite jazz guitarist if you had to choose one? That's a super tough question. In case you don't know, I am a jazz guitarist. I really like, I'm getting a message from somebody. I really like Jim Hall. Jim Hall is a great player. I like his simplicity. I just love his lines. And honestly, his playing on the bridge, on Sonny Rollins' The Bridge, is just phenomenal. Jim Hall is the best, man. Jim Hall is amazing. Now, there's a lot of other guitar players I like, but there's something about the way Jim Hall plays that I really appreciate. As far as modern guys, I'm really into Peter Bernstein. I've actually studied with Peter Bernstein. I live in New York City, by the way, everybody, if you didn't know. So I am very blessed. I can go out and check out some of this music happening. Ted Green's awesome too, Zach. So Peter Bernstein is a guy I really think is amazing. If you haven't checked out Peter Bernstein, you should go check him out immediately. It doesn't matter if you're not a guitar player, if you are a guitar player or not. Peter Bernstein is one of the best jazz musicians, I think, out there. Oh, who's my favorite jazz pianist? McCoy Tyner is amazing. The High Tower. I know that's not your name. I love McCoy Tyner. I love Wynton Kelly a lot. I just think Wynton Kelly, the way he plays, every time he plays, Bill Evans, yeah. See, it's too hard. It's just way too hard to come up with a favorite, I think. But I do love Wynton Kelly. I've transcribed some of his solos. I just find he has just so much musical information to offer. Wynton Kelly. Now, modern guys, I love Brad Mehldau. Different people have different opinions about his playing. I really love Brad Mehldau. I think he's just a genius. So if you haven't checked out Brad Mehldau, go check him out. He has a lot of Live at the Village Vanguard albums out that are really amazing. Art of the Trio. Joseph, what's up? What are your tips on improvisation? Oh, so many tips. It's crazy. If I were just to sum it up right now, I mean, we talked a little bit about scales just now and how there's a right and a wrong way to use scales, but that you can use them to conceptualize language. But as far as improvisation goes, it's pretty simple. Just start learning solos, licks, and lines from recordings. Learn more jazz standards. That's super important because the big thing, and I talk about this in our new ebook, Zero to Improv, zerotoimprov.com, by the way. I talk all about how the way you become a better jazz improviser is by understanding jazz harmony. That's super important to understand jazz harmony. So just learning more tunes is super important. And of course, understanding what chord progressions are, 2-5-1s, and then learning language over 2-5-1 or learning language over a 1-6-2-5-1. Just being able to get all that together. But if I were to say one thing that you should do right now, Joseph, is I hope I didn't get your name wrong. Anyways, one thing that you should do is learn solos and learn parts of solos and licks and lines and different things like that. All right, so I hope that was helpful. I'm trying this out. This is new. I'm trying this out, just coming out live once a week, just to talk about the podcast episode. Podcast episodes are so awesome. We're getting like 30,000 downloads a month, right? Oh, you're welcome, Joseph. Totally welcome. We're getting like 30,000 downloads a month on the podcast. It's doing really awesome, and we're just so thrilled to be sharing jazz education with all of you. If you guys ever have any ideas for more podcast episodes, always feel free to shoot them out. We're really here to serve you, me and the LGS team. We really just want to serve you and help you become better jazz musicians. That's what we're all about. This is a jazz community. So be sure to do that. Check out the podcast episode 61 about scales. That's at learnjazzstandards.com/episode 61. And if you've never joined our jazz community before, by the way, go to learnjazzstandards.com/newsletter. And you'll also get a free ebook, The Ultimate Jazz Guide to Practicing, which I think like 25,000 people have that book now, which is really awesome. So join our jazz community there. Hope you guys enjoyed this today. Hope there was some help. I got to get to a gig, so I better start getting ready. Really enjoyed hanging out with you guys. I'll see you guys next week, and I appreciate all of you. Until next time, and hope you all have a great week of practicing.